because we've been able to manage it, and it's been good. It's been good. I think it's more just like big decisions are weird at being in, right? Should I really do this decision? But we don't really have a choice with that stuff, right? We just have to do it, and so just kind of being like doing our best. We're going to get through this, and hopefully by the time the new secretary gets here, the worst of this will be decided and move forward. Yes. Yeah. It's able to.
Figure out what's happening right now.
And it's so crazy. You have to go to social media to anyway. That's the weirdest thing in the world, that like you're getting your news hour and an hour from social media about
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Yeah, good to see you guys.
to see you.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. As you know, our state is facing a significant budget shortfall. It's a challenge that's going to demand thoughtful leadership, action, and a commitment to fiscal responsibility. Washington has long been a beacon of progress, innovation, equity, and opportunity, and we must ensure that these values continue to guide us through these difficult decisions. Today marks day 43 of my administration. For the past month, my team, and I'm joined by many members of my cabinet and many members of the budget team, my team and I have spent a significant amount of time working to identify and propose savings to help the legislature resolve this shortfall. It is important to contextualize today's announcement. First, I want to emphasize our work, my work, our team's work is not done. We have not had much time to go through a very large budget. We need more time to go even deeper. That's what we're going to be doing for the next 2 months. While we are not proposing a full budget today, of course, it's fair to say that we did months of work in a few weeks. Second, these are not, of course, final decisions. These are proposals that we are making to the legislature for their consideration. We will, of course, be working with both parties over the next 2 months to resolve our budget issues. Third, while we are recommending very specific budget reductions and efficiencies from former Governor Inslee's proposed budget, we are not proposing an entirely new budget. All of my proposed reductions, of course, are being made available to you and the public. I'm grateful to my budget team and my cabinet for working extremely hard and leaning into this difficult but important assignment. Together, we carefully examined our budget within significant time constraints and made difficult choices. I'm joined by many members of my cabinet, as you can see. I'm also joined by Katie Chapman-C, Director of the Office of Financial Management. Katie has been a huge help, and her team, as you might imagine, through this process. Katie will, of course, help me in answering any specific questions you may have about the budget, and will be available afterwards for one-on-ones if you have individual questions for her as well. After this initial review of the past several weeks, I'm recommending approximately $4 billion in savings to the state budget. The precise number is $3,926,404,000. These savings are in addition to Governor Inslee's proposal, which reduced the shortfall by an additional $3 billion. Combined, these proposals reduced the projected $15 billion budget shortfall by $7 billion. We achieved these savings, and this is important, while maintaining all K-12 education investments and adopting all of Governor Inslee's proposed investments, which total more than $15 billion annually. As a result of this work, we've actually increased the percentage of our budget devoted to K-12. Next, we maintained all public safety investments from the current biennium and adopted virtually all new investments from the Inslee budget. We maintained all investments to address homelessness and housing assistance from the current biennium and adopted virtually all new investments from the Inslee budget. That totals more than $1.2 billion per biennium. We're honoring and maintaining the collective bargaining agreements negotiated with our hardworking public servants. We maintained all current cash benefit assistance programs that benefit Washingtonians, such as TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. We also maintained Medicaid eligibility for all Washingtonians. Put another way, if you are a Washingtonian on Medicaid, you will not lose your state coverage. We achieved these significant savings while centering the needs of the people of our state, including those who are facing challenging times during this economy. That does not mean, of course, that all these decisions were easy. Our work was certainly complicated by the chaos and the threats from the Trump administration to our federal funding, which we've talked about here in the past. I also want to mention the key principles that guided our decisions and my decisions. First, good government efficiencies and reductions in state agencies to ensure we're running as lean as possible and right-sizing our government. Many of these reductions we should be making even if we are not facing a budget shortfall. I'll give you a few examples in a moment. Number two, given our budget situation, we very carefully examined proposed or adopted spending that has not yet been implemented. Our goal was to minimize cuts to services actually being realized by Washingtonians currently. Third, we're reconsidering recent spending. So, for example, investments made 2 years ago for the current biennium are examples of investments that need to be reconsidered. Here's my logic. If the legislature 2 years ago knew that we'd be facing a $15 billion shortfall, I'm confident some of those investments would not have happened. Fourth, during COVID, we received significant one-time funding from the federal government for various programs. These one-time dollars are essentially gone. In some circumstances, the state has backfilled those one-time dollars with ongoing general fund resources. And I understand why. Those are good programs. I took a very close look at whether the state could take on those obligations for those federal dollars that were meant as a one-time investment during COVID. So before taking your questions, I'll take the time to explain how we applied those principles, what our rationale was, and how we'll continue to meet the needs of our residents during these fiscal challenges. We obviously can only cover a few of the items here today, but I do want to give you some highlights with some specific examples. So first, government efficiencies. We found some appropriations that state agencies are unable to spend for one reason or another. For example, the Forest Practices Board has a $1.1 million for rulemaking. It actually does not need to do rulemaking at the moment. We're moving that back to the general fund. We also found some investments that actually exceed the needs of the state. For example, because of the declining populations at the Special Commitment Center, we're able to close the 24-bed Dogwood unit and consolidate into the remaining units at the Special Commitment Center. That saves nearly $4 million. Here's another example. During the pandemic, we acted quickly to secure critical space for medical logistics. It's essentially a large warehouse. We don't need that space anymore. By scaling back, we'll save $2.2 million in the next biennium and $4.4 million over 4 years. The Department of Ecology and state parks are saving taxpayers $2.4 million over 4 years by consolidating office space and sharing office space. Zero impact to public services. That's just smart government. The Department of Services for the Blind. They pay for a certain number of spots in the youth adult training programs at the School for the Blind in Vancouver. Whether they're filled or not, they pay those dollars. Now, if we can't fill those spots, we're going to open eligibility to young people in Oregon. The Oregon Commission for the Blind will reimburse us for any spot they fill. We expect that to bring in $52,000 over the next 4 years. We make targeted reductions in state-funded marketing and outreach campaigns, as well as studies and task forces that are not essential for public safety or contributing to the social safety net. We're also significantly reducing state government travel, and will continue to look for additional efficiencies. In short, we achieved many millions of dollars of savings through what I would consider to be good government reductions. Let's talk about new spending. Another category of savings involved pausing or phasing in new programs or proposed program expansions that have not yet been implemented. So I just want to be clear, these are decisions that have been made, programs that are potentially expanded, or new programs, but it's not actually happened yet. So, for example, our goal here is to pause many of those or to phase them in over time to reduce the cost. Here's an example. We achieved $144 million in savings by gradually implementing the proposed rate increase to child care centers over 4 years instead of all at once on July 1st. In other words, these individuals will receive this expansion. It's just going to take a little bit longer. I mentioned reconsidering recent budget decisions. So these are things that are in the budget that were adopted very recently, for example, in the current biennium. And my logic there was, hey, the legislature knew 2 years ago what our budget shortfall was going to be. They might want to reconsider those decisions. So, for example, we went from spending $14 million annually, this is from our general fund, in 2021 on foundational public health to spending more than $155 million per year. So I just want to repeat that, right? So for foundational public health, very important programs, these dollars are invested throughout our state. The state was spending $14 million from our general fund in 2021. There have been increases to those important programs, and that's gone to $155 million per year. I propose reducing that to $133 million per year. That saves us many tens of millions of dollars over the course of the next 4 years. I will say I understand how important these programs are. When I was on the King County Council, I served on the King County Public Health Board, so I have an appreciation for that. I sat through many budget hearings, discussions about programs that public health provides. So yes, we are scaling that back, but it is still a dramatic increase just in the last 4 or 5 years on our investments in that program. But given our budget constraints, we need to dial that back a little bit. Limiting replacement to one-time funding. We also looked at programs where the federal government gave us one-time COVID money. Those are good programs, but the federal money is essentially gone. We cannot continue backfilling those programs indefinitely with general fund dollars. I'll give you an example. The Washington State Department of Agriculture provides assistance to food banks, an important program. As recently as 2019, that program received $12 million in general fund support per biennium. During the pandemic, the state used one-time federal funds to temporarily increase the program during that challenging time for a lot of Washingtonians. So in the 2021 to 23 biennium, $128 million in one-time federal dollars went into that program. As that federal funding has declined significantly, the legislature has invested substantial funding to backfill those federal dollars. I propose we limit the general fund investment to $82 million for the next biennium, which is still 6 times greater than our general fund investment from just 6 years ago. I will also note, I know from personal experience how important food banks are. I used to direct an emergency service office. That was my job after I finished college. My job was folks from this neighborhood would come in. They would seek assistance for food and utility bills. My job in the evening was to deliver the food to their homes every evening. That was a part of my job for a year. So I understand how important those programs are. But in these challenging budget times, we need to scale our investments accordingly. We cannot backfill all those federal funds for that program. Additional savings. I'm going to talk briefly about the collective bargaining agreement. And I want to speak directly to our state workers, who are the backbone of our state and, of course, our state government. You all provide critical services to the people of our state, which I value. That's why we must honor the collective bargaining agreements negotiated with those workers. That is a contract, and we're going to honor that. Given our budget situation, however, I am proposing more than $300 million in savings by requiring most state employees to take a furlough day, 1 day a month for the next 2 years. Certain public employees will be exempt, including troopers patrolling our roads, staff working our prisons, and state hospitals. I believe this is necessary to preserve the funding for the compensation increases they earned and negotiated. I continue to support full funding for the collective bargaining increases. Furloughs, of course, do reduce compensation without reducing salaries, so that employees will return to the compensation levels they have earned and bargained once we get through this budget crisis. There are, of course, throughout this process, all the folks behind me made many recommendations. Many of those I accepted, many I went back and said I need some more information. Some I'm not ready to adopt at this time. There's about another $1 billion, I think more than $1 billion of suggestions. I want to be clear, these aren't recommendations, right? They're putting ideas to me that I can consider from their budgets. There's a little over $1 billion, I think, in suggestions that I am not recommending at this time. We will forward those to the state legislature so they have the benefit of the expertise of these folks and their thoughts about their budgets. But those will be an additional $1 billion, again, not part of the $4 billion I am recommending. That's a separate bucket, but we'll be forwarding those to the legislature so they can examine those as well. I also just want to mention that throughout this process, there are plenty of items where the team made suggestions. I mentioned those, but we just need more time to spend looking at those. I need more information. I need more data. I need more information. There's a lot of that, and everybody's working extremely hard. Some of those are just going to take more time. I don't want to be making knee-jerk decisions about really important budget items. So you'll be seeing more proposals for me in the weeks ahead. So I do want to talk about next steps. There are many parts of the budget we have not had time to do a deep dive on. So for example, Governor Inslee proposed significant new investments. We're still reviewing those. We're going through that. As part of our process, as I mentioned, agencies brought forward a number of different items I need more information on. We'll be continuing that work. Including the proposals from Governor Inslee, his proposed budget, we are approximately halfway toward closing the $15 billion budget shortfall. Another way of thinking about it, I think we're about 43% of the way through the session and nearly 50% of the way towards solving the shortfall. So we're on schedule, but we have a lot more work to do. We, of course, have a revenue forecast coming soon. I believe it's next month, which may increase or decrease the budget shortfall that we're facing. Of course, we're also mindful that I have a supplemental budget I'll be proposing later on this year. After the team gets a well-deserved break, I've already communicated to them we'll be going right back to work on preparing for that supplemental budget. You know, obviously, doing the work we've done, as I mentioned earlier, often takes a lot of time. There are months to prepare for it. We've just not had the luxury of that time, to be perfectly honest with you. So I'm looking forward to having more time with the team once we get through the next couple months to spend even more time going through the budget for the supplemental budget I'll be proposing later on in the year. A few final thoughts. I recognize that we could do everything right in the way we budget and still end up with a budget deficit in the future. For example, the federal government could make decisions that adversely impact our budget. We must do a better job of budgeting within our means. I've said this many times. I do not plan on doing this every 2 years. I also want to emphasize that we understand that decisions we make impact people's lives, and we do not take that lightly. I also want to emphasize to Washingtonians, your voice matters. You know, write to me, write to us, let us know your thoughts about this. We can achieve savings and preserve our values. I believe that. We can save billions of dollars without touching core investments in K-12 education, in public safety, in homelessness, in housing services, and remain one of the most progressive states in terms of looking out for folks who are experiencing challenges. If the legislature adopts all of my recommendations, hypothetically, the following will still be true. A single parent in Washington working 40 hours a week and families in similar economic situations can access affordable child care subsidies that ensure they do not spend more than 7% of their household income on child care. They can pursue college or apprenticeships for free, thanks to the work of our legislature and decisions they made. They can apply for and receive $640 to cover additional costs of the Working Families Tax Credit. They can access food assistance programs, such as EBT cards, and food banks supported by our general fund. They can tap into economic assistance through TANF programs. They can receive free hospital care. They can receive free health care for their children through Medicaid. They can receive subsidized dental care and other health care services. These are just a few of the many examples of programs and policies that have been adopted to support Washington families during this tough economy. We will remain committed throughout this process to our values as a state. Our proposals reinforce those values and help put us on a path to a sustainable and balanced budget. Together, I believe we can build a more sustainable future for Washingtonians, one that is both fiscally responsible and remains true to our values. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I have no doubt that I'll be asking Katie to help me out if things get specific. Yes, go ahead, Jim.
Governor, you identified closing about half the gap over 4 years. Correct?
Right.
This is a 4-year gap.
That's correct.
Obviously, that leaves half of it remain. There are some people out there who are wondering whether this is laying the groundwork. You may look at some revenue, some tax increases. You've been reluctant to say you would do that, but after going through this exercise anyway, are you now leaning more in the direction that you might have to sign off on tax increases, and what would they look like?
I'd say it's too soon to say right now, Jim. We have been, I just can't underline enough, right? Our energy's been focused entirely on this process, which is time-consuming and a lot of decisions being made to get to that $4 billion figure, to put it mildly. And so that's been my focus. I'm looking forward to how the legislature, what their reaction is. And by the way, I should emphasize, I know legislature is doing their own work on trying to find efficiencies as well. So we need to sort of come together and figure out what we can do. And I think at that point we'll have a better idea of hey, where we are on addressing that shortfall. We have the revenue forecast yet ahead. Let's see where that places us. So there are still some important milestones ahead, but the focus right now has been, frankly, to do what I set out to do. Was there a path forward to achieve billions of dollars in savings that did not go against our core values as a state or jeopardize core services? And I think these recommendations achieve that goal, but obviously more to come. Yeah.
I'm going to follow up
Yep.
on Jim's questions. I got a three-parter.
A three-parter. Okay, I'll try and keep track. All right.
Okay. One, aren't taxes, regardless of what type of taxes, just the basic math, doesn't the basic math indicate that some sort of taxes are inevitable?
Well, let me go. If I can answer one at a time, I'll forget otherwise. So, well, I don't know if I got any more to add to what Jim already asked. It's
You gotta have some taxes because $4 billion doesn't.
well, let's look. I'm new to being governor, but I'm not new to the legislature, right? Last time I checked, we've still got 2 months to go in this legislative session, right? We have a long way to go. We have a revenue forecast we have not received yet. Our work is certainly not done. I want to be crystal clear about that. We have done a ton of work, okay? But there are still, we were making decisions late yesterday, to be clear. Things being added, things being taken out. This is happening in real time, in other words. I want to emphasize that. I have many more questions back to agencies. Say, what about this? What about that? I need to sit down and have a conversation with legislative leaders. What are they finding out? I know they're doing their own work, which is not insignificant. They're leaning into it as well. So I'm just, look, at some point, I'll have a better answer to that question, but I just don't think that's right now.
Okay. Has the 6% across the agency budget cut, has that been factored in yet? And
That's what this is. That's essentially so.
this is the 6%.
And sorry if I wasn't clear, but thanks for asking. So in other words, I didn't spend much time on sort of the process, but maybe I'll just briefly mention. So what I did was I asked all the agencies to submit 6% reductions. We've spent the last several weeks going through those, like literally every single one of them. Sometimes we said, great, we can take them. More often it was, hey, a phone call back, checking in, what about this? I'm not excited about that cut. Is there another alternative? You get the idea. But this $4 billion that we're proposing comes, I think it's fair to say, primarily from those proposals in response to my request for the 6% reductions, yes.
Final, and again, I'm going to challenge the math.
Yeah.
I'm not, this is a total guesstimate on my part.
Okay.
And I could be easily proven wrong. But I looked at the embargoed sheet and have been sort of keeping tabs on what you've been talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like the most that I could come up with is roughly $1 billion out of a $4 billion shortfall. So how do you get to the 50%, or should I be challenging the 50%?
We'll welcome any challenge. So we believe we're looking at approximately, and things can be subject to change based on revenue forecasts and everything else, approximately a $15 billion shortfall over the next 4 years, right? What I'm proposing today are $4 billion in savings. Governor Inslee's proposal had another $3 billion. Put those together, that's your $7 billion out of $15 billion. We're obviously using round numbers. So as I said before, is there still work to do? Of course. Will the legislature adopt every one of my recommendations? Maybe, maybe not, right? But they're going to have their own recommendations. I know they are doing their own work, right? They'll have their own ideas, right? Which I look forward to reviewing what they've got. So I just think, just being honest, we're still, I think we're still in February. If we're still in February, look, we still have a ways to go before we get to the end of the session. And so my approach in life is one step at a time and focus on the step that's in front of you. This is the step that's in front of us, is to see, could we get another $4 billion without impacting those core services? And I think that's what we've done.
Governor,
Thanks. Just one second, I'll just go in order here. Yeah, go ahead.
How are you getting to that $15 billion shortfall number? Everyone seems to have a different number.
I have seen different numbers. This is what my team has advised. Look, we get that it's fluid. It depends on how you calculate it. We think $15 billion is a number. I think the legislature is largely using that as well. And that's the number that we worked off through this. Yes, go ahead.
so Inslee's budget included the idea of transferring, I think, more than $1.5 billion out of the rainy day fund into the general fund, paying that back later on. It's an idea that Democratic leadership has said they will include in their budget proposals. The Treasurer's Office is opposed to it.
Right.
Where do you stand on this idea of essentially borrowing most of the money out of the rainy day fund and then paying it back in 28, 2029, just given the uncertainty about federal dollars,
Yeah.
potential cuts, and then, not knowing what revenue is going to look like?
Yeah, so in terms of the governor's proposed budget on things he had in there, I've not taken position on each and every one of those. I want to be clear about that. We've focused on the assignment in front of us. That said, I don't disagree with anything you said about, hey, the potential challenges with that, especially in light of what might be coming from the federal government. To preserve our reserves is going to be important, and for our credit rating. So we'll be having those conversations with the legislature. I think it's important to preserve that. But those will be conversations we have. So I'm not going to lock myself in right this very moment, but those will be conversations we're having. Yes?
Could you please elaborate on the estimated $15 billion shortfall? I know that Jake just asked about it, but yesterday we were media availability with Democratic leadership, and they were referencing a $12 billion estimated shortfall. What's the difference in the $3 billion?
I'm not sure, Katie, if you can. This is Katie, everybody, as you know.
Thanks. I think that number is looking at Governor Inslee's policy level proposal for increases in the budget, but I have a paper that I'm happy to walk folks through sort of to get to that specific number. I probably hit 15 if that works. Yeah.
Thanks.
Governor?
Yes.
I'm hoping you can clarify a couple of things because we're doing a story problem here on the fly with all the math. And there's a couple of big chunks here that are a little vague. One being the rolling back the clock on the recent spending. Obviously, there was a $2 billion increase in the last budget.
Right.
What exactly does rolling back the spending mean, and what exactly does all these travel cuts mean? What's the number on that factors into this?
So the rolling back the clock, what that is a principle that I applied to this, Chris, which is, hey, if we go back 2 years, for example, when decisions are made for the current biennium, investments were made by the legislature. My sense is if they knew at that time what the projected shortfall was going to be, they might not have made all those decisions. So one thing that I've done, this is just a principle, right, for your story, just to give a sense, I'm trying to give a sense of Washington, is how I prioritized, how I made decisions. And so my feeling was, hey, if there was a decision that was very recent, right, that those should be re-examined in light of the budget shortfall. The legislators might have a different outcome to that. So there are some changes we made, some we left, and we're leaving we're going to work with the legislature about, right? We don't have time to go through every single one of them, obviously, but for me, that's trying to apply a principle to how we're making difficult decisions and trying to find those savings. In terms of the travel, you're asking for like a dollar amount on that?
Yeah, it's just 50% out of state, 25% in state, 10% on equipment. What's that number?
Do we have that number, Katie, or can we get that?
We can get that number,
Yep, we can get that for you. And we appreciate your patience, but I want to be clear, Chris, right? Last night, I'm calling Katie saying, hey, cut this, add this. Like, this is something that is, and I know you all appreciate, you've been around here a long time, that this process has been a few weeks that would normally be many months. And so we appreciate your understanding about that, but this is literally happening in real time through conversations this morning. And we're just going to pick right back up, give everybody a break for 24 hours, but we'll get right back into it. So I want to be clear, there will be more ahead, but it was really my job to get information to the legislature, right? That they've got deadlines, they've got a budget, these things are happening very quickly. And so we gave ourselves today as our deadline. But we have those numbers, we'll get those for you. But we understand it's a lot of information, of course, by definition. But as you can appreciate, it's a challenge I inherited. It wasn't like I've had months to work on this thing. This has been a relatively quick turnaround, so we appreciate your understanding on that. Yes?
Of the cuts you unveiled, can you clarify how many of them could be unilaterally implemented through agency heads, and how many would need to be?
Oh, good question. Great question. I'll just repeat that so everybody could hear. So the question went to something that was an important part of our conversation is how many of these of the recommendations can simply be implemented as opposed to needing a change in state law. So that's been a big part of our conversation. Each time, often I would ask that question. Do we know a percentage, or can we provide that, Katie?
I think we could provide it. I don't have that number handy.
So that has been some. So that is why we also, to Chris's point, that is why we wanted to get this out today, because we were mindful that a number of these do require legislative action. Okay, and so we're mindful of that. We've had conversations with legislative leadership. They've reminded me of their deadlines as well, and that, hey, we need this information, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need this information, get it to us. So we're mindful of that, and it sounds like he can get you, if there's a specific question you have about a program, by all means, we're happy to try and track that down for you if you're looking for an answer on that, because that has been a regular part of the conversation for essentially every item. Yeah.
Governor, you mentioned $1 billion in suggestions that you were not willing to sign off on today. Are you willing to share some of those? What was too far?
We'll be releasing all of it, so be clear, that'll be all released, Drew. And, I mean, what I would just say is a general matter, and again, I want to emphasize, I appreciate all the suggestions that came to me, right? That's number one. I think it's fair to say that if there was a suggestion that was cutting a benefit a Washingtonian was receiving, okay, you know, I just was reluctant to make those cuts at this time, and so. And I think it's fair to say for the bulk of that $1 billion, I just felt, hey, no, you know, we're not there yet, right? We've got more work to do. I need some other alternatives. So we are providing those to legislature just so they see them, right? And you can see them, like that they're out there. And I'm not saying I won't go back and maybe recommend a few. Look, there were multiples just last night that I took off the list, to be clear. Like literally last night, we're going through when we had categorized in different ways, and some were, I forget the term we had, but ones that were challenging. And so we kind of bookmarked those, and I say there were a number of, just last night we were sitting here and said, nope, not yet, not yet. And so there's not one easy answer to all those, but I'd say as a general matter, they tended to be services directly to Washingtonians, a benefit they were receiving, housing assistance or something along those lines, and I was reluctant to cut those. Yes?
Paul, I have a quick question for Katie after, but
Yeah.
to follow up on what you just said, one of the specific cuts you mentioned was to food banks. We've heard from food banks who are seeing more families that
Yes.
don't qualify for transfer, EBT,
Yeah.
while they're also facing increased costs. Is now the time to cut that funding when families are struggling to put food on the table?
It's a difficult decision. So that's why I put in context in my remarks, and hopefully I'm remembering the number correctly, but to be clear, our general fund investment in that program, even with my recommendation, is still, and I hope I got the number right, 6 times what it was just several years ago, to be clear, right? So can it be, so we are thankful the federal government gave us over $100 million in one-time funding, and that helped folks during COVID, but that's an important decision to make. Is it now our obligation to continue that level of funding indefinitely? Look, as someone who has operated a food bank, okay, personally done that, I appreciate the question, for sure. And the good news is the state is not the only provider. There are faith-based organizations. There are others, as you well know. And so I'm confident we can still help folks out. But any fair summary of that proposal, I trust, would include the fact that our general fund endorsement, or the general fund investment is still, I believe, again, hopefully I'm not mixing up which one it was, but I think it's still 6 times what it was just for 5 years ago. And I think for most Washingtonians, that seems like a reasonable investment of the general fund over those years. And but that is not to minimize that. As an example, we spent a lot of time on, as an example, there was a lot of time spent on that very specific issue. What's the right number? Do we touch it? Do we not touch it? What do we do? I don't know the exact amount of time we spent on that one, but it was many conversations over multiple weeks on that one very issue, as an example. So my job was just to do the best, and that was another sort of way I tried to guide my decisions is, hey, trying to take a longer view, looking back over 4 or 5 years of the state's investment, right? And that's not the only one where I'm scaling back a general fund investment, but that investment is still, under my recommendation, significantly more than it was just a few years ago, to be clear. There are other examples. And that just seemed to me, given a budget shortfall, would I want to do that? If there wasn't a budget shortfall, of course I wouldn't do that, right? But look, we're not going to tax our way out of this thing. Not going to happen. $15 billion is a lot of money. And that is an example of what I would describe, again, having personal experience with delivering food to people who need it, as one that I found especially challenging. That's fair. Yeah. Let's do a couple more. Yeah, go ahead.
Based on your conversation so far with Democratic leadership in the legislature, how far apart would you say you are from them when it comes to how to address this problem? I mean, they're not even working off the same number you are in terms of the gap you're describing. They're using 12 billion, you're saying 15. They seem fairly resigned to tax increases. So, I mean, how much daylight, I guess, is there between the two parties there?
Oh, I think we're working closely together. It's, I mean, a key next step is I'll be very interested with what they come up with for their recommendations. But I know from conversations with leadership, they're doing their own work, right? Just like they know we were doing our own. So there's obviously going to be a coming together on what those are and additional negotiations. So I think it's too soon to say whether we're lined up or opposed, or there's daylight or there's not daylight. I just honestly have not been focused on that piece of it. We're in regular communication. They know the work we're doing. They know the reductions that we're proposing, the dollar amounts, and there's a lot of time ahead of us to come together. Yes?
Governor, you mentioned one-time funding for COVID-era programs.
Yeah.
So the WEA started getting funding for a COVID program to train substitutes. Now OSPI is requesting around $70 million to continue that program. I'm wondering if your office has looked into this program to make sure it's still needed and legitimate moving forward.
Do you remember, Katie, if we? Sorry, so I'm pausing only because I don't. Yeah.
As part of this exercise, we did not look at K-12 spending or reductions. So it may have been something that was considered during the development of Governor Inslee's budget, but we'd have to get back to you on that specific point.
And so just to be clear, like in terms of the direction I gave the team was, hey, we're not cutting on public safety, we're not cutting on K through 12 education. So I think that is why that was not a part of the conversation. So again, I want to be clear, it's a huge budget. We tried to, in the time we had, to be focused on a pretty big bite at the apple, but it's not everything, right? And so, in my experience, I just felt like I need to give some parameters to the team and to let the people of the state of Washington what my guiding principles are for getting through the shortfall. And one of those was your question, hey, we're not touching K through 12 education, that was one of them. So that's why it wasn't a part of the conversation we've been having the last several weeks. But happy to take a look at that program. Yeah, happy to take a look at the program. Yes, let's do a couple more.
You said that if the legislature maybe knew at the time about the kind of budget deficit that they would be facing, maybe spending would have looked a little bit different. What do you think the missing link was, and how do you prevent that moving forward?
Well, I did say in my inaugural address that, hey, I forget the exact words I had, but words to the effect of, hey, at some point we need to have an honest conversation about how we got here. And that still needs to happen. At this point, I can't spend a lot of time looking back, right? We've got some big challenges right in front of us. But my opinion on that has not changed, right? There will need to be, at the right time, an assessment of how we got here, what can we change in how we budget to avoid having this conversation every 2 years. And I've been very clear that barring a recession, barring the federal government doing something that harms our budget, barring something not in our control, right, I do not want to be having this conversation every 2 years. I'm being crystal clear with everybody to have a conversation about, okay? And so when I've got the time and when my team has the time, yes, we're going to be taking a look at what we can do differently. And look, have there been times in the last few weeks where I've seen things in the budget where I said, hey, come on, what are we doing? What were we doing here? We need to reevaluate those kinds of decisions. So yes, but we just haven't had the bandwidth to focus on that right now, and I think that's the right approach. We got a shortfall, right? We've got a crisis right now. Focus on that. Once we get through it, there'll be time for that conversation. Yes, follow. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Both of you. Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked about decision essentially excluding public safety and K-12 education, but Inslee's budget talks about cuts to DOC facilities, and to your savings proposal also talks about warm closures at Western State. How are you defining public safety?
Fair question, yep. Yeah, it's a good question. We've had that conversation as well, right? Like, hey, does this thing fall in the public safety bucket or not? We've done our best to define that, right, in a way that we think makes sense to Washingtonians. But hey, if you want to ask a specific question, what bucket it was in, we're happy to answer it. But some of these things don't fit neatly into one bucket. They're a program that does multiple things. So we've done our best to define these things in a way that makes sense. Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is it primarily law enforcement that you're talking about when you say public safety?
Oh, that is certainly a piece of it, right? But that is not necessarily everything on that. But again, if there's a specific item you have, hey, let Katie and I know, and we're happy to try and answer specifically how we tried to define it. Yeah.
I think we'd appreciate some specifics on the number of furloughs, consolidations, cuts to management and administrative positions.
We have that. Yep.
But with those cuts that you're proposing, combined with cuts from the federal government, and also today from private employers, we saw, as an example, Starbucks filing a warn notice for 600 jobs.
Yes.
Are you worried about the general health of the economy right now?
Yes. I'll elaborate on it, but yes, I've seen those same headlines and share that concern. That's why I am very interested in seeing what our next forecast is, and deeply concerned what might be coming from the federal government, which is a total wild card, obviously. And which also gets to, as we go forward in this process, I think back to an earlier question on reserves is, we can only control what we can control, but we can also anticipate some potential challenges that might be coming our way, the economy in general, or what might be coming from the federal government. And so, all the more reason why we need to make sure we're making difficult decisions, whether that's, right, food assistance with food banks. We need to find the right balance in how we do this budget, but we have to be mindful looking ahead that, hey, the legislature is going to finish this thing hopefully on time, but things could be happening once that legislative session ends and before we're back here again, that could impact our budget situation. So having sufficient reserves, making sure we're balancing this in a way that keeps an eye on those more unpredictable factors is certainly on my mind, yes.
Governor, I just wanted to follow up on her
Yeah,
question real
go for
quick
it. Yeah,
in terms
I'll
of
come back to you, Jim.
defining public safety,
Yeah.
wildfire mitigation,
Yeah.
DNR.
Yeah.
Did you touch those funds?
Yeah, thanks for asking on that. So first, Dave Updegrove has been very helpful with this, number one. I want to emphasize that. Suspect he'd be happy to chat with you about it. So we work with his team. Dave and I exchange messages as well. And so as you know, the investment in preventing firefighters as a state has gone up dramatically. Hopefully I don't get these numbers wrong. Katie, correct me, but I think gone from like $80 million annually, like $400 million annually. I think okay, so from 80 to 400 million just in the last few years. So appropriately so, right? Thank goodness we've done it. So when we went to the commissioner to ask, he proposed, and Chris, hopefully I'm working off memories. Hopefully I get this right, but we'll double check it. But there were 2 helicopters that he said were basically underutilized. They weren't really utilizing that they had or that they leased, and that he said it was actually part of their long-term plan to phase those out anyway. We followed up with him. I was like, hey, when I saw that, I was like, wait a second, are we sure we want to do that? And he let me know, nope, this makes sense. Trust me, we've got significant investments. That's not going to harm our capability to fight forest fires. So that was a reduction, if you want to call it that, obviously in light of a more than $300 million investment, but one that, because I said to Dave Hazer, should we take out from something else from your budget? He said, no, this is one that makes sense, and that this is not going to impair our ability. So once again, that's an example where the general fund investment to address that serious issue has gone up exponentially, as it should. And so, but I did want to double check with him, make sure he was good with that, and he was. Is that a fair way to summarize it? Okay, yep. So thanks, I'm glad, and thanks for asking that. That was, we had a lot of things we tried to scale back these talking points, but that was one that we, I'm glad you asked about. I think I had Jim, and I'll come here, and then we'll do one more. Yep.
You mentioned furloughs that you're asking. Are you contemplating a reduction in the state workforce as part of your budget cutting plans here? In other words, through attrition or through layoffs?
Correct, and we have a number we can give you afterwards that Katie will have.
You know, approximately.
Do you have an approximate number? Can we give?
We'd have to run the numbers through the system to get you a firm number, Jim.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Yep, that is a part of it. We're happy to run the numbers. Again, appreciate your patience. This is happening real time, right? But yes, that is a part of it for sure. Yep. So we had a few, I'll keep going. So I'll get to everybody. Go ahead, yeah.
Helicopters, do you have backup helicopters essentially if you're not replacing 2?
Yes. Dave made it, the commissioner made it very clear. We exchanged messages on this. My team followed up, made it very clear this will not impact or impair their ability to fight forest fires. So that was a follow-up conversation we had. Encourage you to reach out to them directly on that, but I want to be very clear about that. We followed up to make absolutely sure. Yes.
Just to be clear, the remaining $8 billion that's not
Yeah.
addressed by the reductions you described, at this stage you're saying you don't have a plan or a preference how that chunk of the deficit gets addressed, and before you put anything forward, you're waiting for the legislature to come up with what they would like to propose?
No.
And you're waiting to see what the revenue forecast shows?
No. Well, I think I'm sorry if I've not been clear. We're going to give everybody a day off, okay, right? And we're going to go right back to going through this budget, okay? So I'm not waiting around for anything. I want to be clear. I have highlighted in response to questions that there are some big things coming, right, that will help inform my decisions, including, hey, what is our revenue forecast, right? That's important. I'm not waiting for it. I want to be clear. If I use that word, my apologies. But I'm not waiting around for it. But I'm keenly interested in what that says, because obviously that could make our challenge deeper. It could make our challenge less significant. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Number 2, I'm not waiting for the legislature. I want to be crystal clear about that. But I know from conversations they are working very hard on similar work. They know we're working hard on this similar work. We will be comparing notes on what we are proposing and what they propose. The team will work with their staff to say, hey, what have we got, and see a number. I don't know what that number is that they've got at this point, right? But I know they're working extremely hard on that. So it's not that we don't have a plan, right? It's, hey, one step at a time. $15 billion shortfall is significant, to put it very mildly. And so do I have a solution after 1 week or 43 days? Of course not, you know. But after taking 24 hours off, we're going right back through the budget and doing more follow-up with the team, working the legislature, getting more information as appropriate, and making more decisions going forward. So look, you'll be seeing more proposals from me in the coming days and weeks for sure. Yeah.
With a better look at the numbers now,
Yeah.
is this not the year to pursue the universal breakfast and lunches at schools? That's $500 million over 4 years. Are you willing to think about that another year?
Well, we're looking at options for phasing that in as well. For example, we talked about some programs that I'm not defunding. I'm simply saying, hey, you know what? Let's phase those in over time, right? Gradually do that so we still achieve those program benefits for Washingtonians. We just got to scale it in over time. So we're still pursuing what options we have to help families get the benefit of their kids getting free lunches and breakfasts. So no, we're not ruling that one out. But again, we have a lot of time ahead still in this session, and so we're still working on that. But we understand legislators have their priorities. That's just part of how this process plays out, right, Drew? I mean, it's going to be a lot of work ahead of us. Yes?
Senator Chris Gildon released a statement that was largely praising the cuts that you unveiled.
So I missed the first, my apologies. Could you?
Senator Chris Gildon
Yes.
released a statement that was largely praising the cuts that you released today. Can you talk about some of the discussions that you've had with Republican legislators during this process, just
Sure.
how involved they were?
I guess what I'd say is I appreciate him saying that, number one. Number two, I tend not to get into too much in details of conversations I have with any elected official for obvious reasons. But I feel we've had in these first weeks productive conversations with Republican leadership on a range of issues, by the way, some legislative, but some on the budget. We've kept them informed of, hey, kind of where we're going. Shared information as we've gotten it, shared that with them, and they've shared their feedback on it as well. That does not mean we're exactly aligned, of course, but I believe in working with both parties. I think we need help from everybody in the legislature if we're going to solve this. We welcome any good idea on how we can be more efficient, and so we're going to continue those conversations. Yes.
President Trump has sought to undo DEI programs nationwide. At the same time, some Republicans in the Washington State Legislature a couple of weeks ago introduced a bill that would, I believe, eliminate the Office of Equity.
That's not going to happen. Yeah.
Okay. Any sorts of consideration on comparing that?
Had a whole press conference here 2 weeks ago about the subject of Donald Trump and DEI, and I think I covered it pretty thoroughly there. We've got our values. We're going to stick with our values, and that's part of what this has been, and that as well. So yeah, that won't happen. Yes.
You mentioned protecting K-12 programs, but what kind of policies are or action are going to take to protect funding for higher education, like college? Because federal programs or the federal government is threatening to fund state funded.
Yes. So higher ed had, I think it was a 3% cut that we requested from the higher education. Community college had no cuts. I mean, this goes back to the earlier point on, the federal government of what they may or may not do. So obviously, I'm very mindful of what you're referring to, of what's been discussed at the federal level. I'm also mindful that as a state, we've been successful in litigation that has stopped much of what the federal government is trying to do on those reductions. And so, we have to be aware of potential unexpected things that could happen in the future as we do this. That is not specifically right in front of us right now, right? But it is something I'm very aware of. That again gets us back to our conversations about making difficult decisions, right? To your question earlier, right? Or to reserves, right? That is part of, over these next couple of months, being aware of what's out there, the economy, federal government, and trying to land in a budget that meets our needs, that's balanced, preserves our values, is efficient, but also, let me put it this way, I do not have my head in the sand on what's going on in Washington, D.C., trust me on that. And so those are conversations we're also having with both parties, by the way. I mean, to be clear, that's about what could be coming from D.C., and we need to be aware of that as we do this budget. All right, does anybody else have any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned in your press release, and you noted too, that the Department of Health needed that warehouse that will save $4.4 million over 4
As a level of detail I did not discuss, but we'll get back to you. So my understanding is the recommendation was we could end that lease, if I recall correctly, and so I'm confident there's a plan for that. But we can get back to you on the details of that. Yep.
Governor, are you willing
Yes.
to, are you willing to draw a line in the sand and say you can get this all done by the end of the legislative session, or are you going to need more time?
Oh, my goal is, as I suspect the legislature has the same goal, is to end on time. And but the first job is, I want Washingtonians need to know. I get asked this a lot just by people I run into. Hey, you're going to adopt a balanced budget, as you all know, right? By law, it must be a balanced budget. It has to be done. And so, look, our challenges are significant. That's can't sugarcoat it. But do I feel, after this process, more encouraged that we can finish on time? I do feel more encouraged. Does that mean there's still a long way to go? Of course, there's a very long way to go. But when we started this, I wasn't sure where we're going to land. I really wasn't. And but thanks to the hard work of the team, and they worked extraordinarily hard to get us to this place, which I appreciate. I feel we're on a path, is what I would say. And I think that's what everybody down here wants to see. All right. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for your questions. And Katie will be around and happy if you have questions. Appreciate your patience. It's a big document, a lot of details, and we'll get you the information you need as quickly as we can. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thanks to see you. Yeah, thanks for coming by. I appreciate it.
You too. Thank you.
Appreciate all that help.